Hello and welcome to another Draft Talk podcast brought to you from 99 Yards, where we talk about all things NFL draft. The countdown's well and truly on. We're into draft month. I'm MJ, and tonight I get to be in the box seat for this episode. And I'm joined by two of our regular team, Owen and Brian. So, how are you guys?
Yeah, all good. Thank you, MJ. All excited to talk to our special guest. Oh, give it away. Oh.
Yeah, all good, MJ. We edged closer, worryingly closer, but yeah, all good.
Yeah, so we're delighted to be joined by a special guest for this episode, as we have Daniel Parlegreco with us. Daniel's the author of DTP Draft Scout NFL Draft Guide, and for those of you watching on YouTube, I've got it here. There we go. See, bit of product placement, and that's one of the top annual guides to draft prospects. And his guide's been published since he's been doing this since about 2016, and it's packed with over 300 player evaluations for this year's draft. Daniel's here to talk about the guide, his process in evaluating players, and his thoughts on this year's draft prospects. So it's really great to see you again, Daniel. How are you? How are things? How have you been preparing for the draft?
Doing good, guys. Doing good. I get kind of a leg up because I start so early in the year. What happens is when I typically start the draft process, I start with the seniors first, and then little by little I'll go through the juniors and some of the underclassmen that could potentially qualify. Then what happens is the ones that don't end up going into the draft, I'll have some write-ups from the previous year, so I'll be able to have some tape from analysis from earlier years where it kind of gives me a leg up on a lot of these guys. So I do it much earlier, and I finish my guide so much sooner than probably most of the draft guys, which is kind of a blessing and a curse in some ways.
Yeah, that's great, and that's kind of where we wanted to start with. We've got loads of questions for you, so we'll dive right in. So kind of you touched upon it there, but how do your process is a bit different from others. You start earlier, and you're very much focused on the tape. Do you want to talk about a little bit about how much commitment there is there to watching these guys?
Yeah, so I started, I don't know, maybe 2014, 2015 in that range. And what I did initially, I didn't write a guide, but I would write on some football forums that were pretty common back then, and I would write up analysis. I would watch clips here and there of these guys, and I was kind of tired of going off of the popular draft nicks that would be on TV here in the States, and I kind of wanted to come up to my own conclusions, specifically when it came to the team that I follow, which is the Cowboys. So I would, rather than just go off of the analysis of what guys would say, I would start watching clips, watching videotapes, and kind of coming to conclusions myself, forming on these guys. And little by little, the first couple of years, I do maybe 30, 40, 50 guys that the Cowboys were interested in. And then, I think 2016 was the first time maybe I published the guide. And yeah, it was much smaller back then, but I realized there was an audience for it on Amazon. I published it. It's kind of a little hobby thing I did, and it ended up selling a lot more copies than I ever expected to. And then each year it kind of got bigger and bigger. In the last 3 or 4 years, I'd say it's probably been around the same amount of prospects, over 300. And I try to start earlier and earlier each year. Initially maybe I started in like December. It only really gave me a couple months to watch guys before I published my guide. But now I'm like in October, I really start, but that kind of ties into already having seen a lot of the guys that, ended up staying an extra year in college. So I try to do as much research as I can, in addition to watching multiple game tapes of these guys. What I try to do as much research as I possibly can, talk to everybody I can, and try to include some background information on these guys as well. So it's not just tape, even though I try to focus my reports as far as how I feel with my ratings on the actual tape. I'll try to include some additional information that I can. But like I mentioned, I usually post my guide the beginning of February. And sometimes what happens is there's information that comes to light in the weeks after February or in March, whether it's the combine, or maybe something happens with these guys getting in trouble off the field, or something comes out in the interview process, or maybe there's an injury that's undetected, which possibly my guide doesn't feature. But what it does feature is I really try to focus my ratings based on the game tape, which in a lot of ways has actually seemed to benefit me quite well when it comes to projections and when it comes to future years, as far as how they translate to the next level.
That's great. Let's move on to this year then, Brian. You kick us off with a question.
Well, I guess I was listening to some stuff today, and certain bit that we've not touched on it yet on our podcast, but this class of tight ends, it looks pretty special. There's 4 or 5 sort of superstars, and then even if you look further down, there's some guys that could be really impressive. What's your take on, I guess, the tight ends as a whole, and have you got a favorite?
Yeah, it's stacked. I mean, you kind of have every type of tight end you want here. In prior years, you'd have those guys that were, I think last year was a really great class for blocking tight ends. Previous years, we've had really good athletic tight ends. This year, it's kind of, you got every kind of tight end you want. We haven't seen this kind of depth in a long time at the position. So whether you're looking for that inline guy or you're looking for a guy to flex out wide and play almost as a wide receiver, we have that in this draft class. My favorite, of course, is Michael Mayer from Notre Dame. I think he's kind of a jack of all trades, tight end, does everything really, really well. I'd liken him to like a Jason Witten, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Cowboys fan, but perhaps he's not doesn't have the upside athletically as some of these other tight ends in the class, but he's just good at finding, creases in the middle of the field, finding a little bit of space, reliable target, but also a really solid blocker, especially from the college level. That's going to translate really well to play in line, but also bump outside and play in the slot as well.
Yeah, on Michael Mayer, he seems to be one at the moment. I think I speak for all of us. Well, we all really like him as well, but there seems to be, you through draft analysts, some maybe prospect fatigue with him, where he's so good, but maybe isn't given the credit that he should have deserved. It's crazy. But another class that I'm really high on is the running back class, and a player that you're really high on that I liked as well is Israel Abanikanda from Pitt. How do you see maybe this running back class, and is it just dominated by the one at the top? But it is quite deep, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not really a huge separation between these guys. I think what we're going to end up finding is, some of the guys that go on early day 2, second, third round, they're going to be starters, but there's going to be starters in this running back class, rounds 4 and 5, possibly into round 6 and 7 too. It's a really, really deep class. That's excellent. Of course, Robinson from Texas is the headliner. That's likely going to go in the first round, but he's exceptional. But there's really not a huge drop off from round to round, and I think we're going to see a lot of starters in this particular draft class.
Ryan, have you got the next one about tackles? Because we don't have Stu with us here, who's our expert on offensive linemen.
I'll be honest, I haven't actually got the document, sorry. I was just freewheeling like I do.
Oh, okay. Basically, Stu really liked Anton Harrison, and that caused some discussion on our podcast about the linemen, about the tackles. And you really like Anton Harrison as well. So what perhaps puts him for you ahead of like Peter Skoronski and Paris Johnson?
I would say it's kind of a combination. I think Skoronski is maybe a little more NFL ready as far as, both guys played 3 years, a significant amount of time. I think Skoronski is kind of like a higher floor prospect that has a less likely chance of busting at the next level, if that makes sense. But his ceiling isn't as high. I think a guy like Anton Harrison, and even if you go down to Paris Johnson, I think both these guys have higher ceilings, and they're already good players. But I think as they develop and learn how to use their athletic skill sets and their length and their physical tools, they're only going to get better. Show potential to play on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Skoronski, he has some limitations athletically, has some limitations size-wise that both Harrison and Johnson don't have. So, but like I said, he's going to be a quality starter at the next level immediately. So, it's just you're splitting hairs with these top 3, I think.
Moving on to some defensive players, a player again that you're higher on than seems to be a lot of people is Keely Ringo, the corner from Georgia. Is a player that I really like as well. But what do you think there is about him that's separating him from the guys that you see in the media talk about, and Devon Witherspoon and Christian Gonzalez? What is it about Keely Ringo that really stands out for you that makes him your number 1 corner?
Yeah, he had some concerning tape. I know a lot of guys, in this draft process, a lot of guys, nitpick these guys to death, and he certainly gave up. He had some blemishes on his resume in college. He gave up some big plays. But I think even more than that, you look up the physical traits that he has. Just always having a fearless nature. When you play the cornerback position, one thing that you really want to see in guys is that alpha mentality, that competitive mindset that they want to go up against the top. And he had that. He had no fear despite getting beat at times. He's got the athletic traits to only get better. A lot of Patrick Peterson to his game, just from an athletic standpoint. I think he's going to get better and better. As far as a pure cover guy, do I think, maybe Witherspoon, even Cam Smith, these guys might be more NFL ready to be with fewer mistakes immediately. It's definitely possible, but I think Ringo's ceiling, coupled with the fact that he already competed against top tier competition, playing in the SEC, I think he's just he's really, really a loaded prospect that has the highest ceiling out of any of these kids.
With a corner, with it being such an athletic position, do you maybe favor the athletes then over the ones that are kind of NFL ready now, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. I think you do, because if you look at translatable skills for the cornerback position, I think, mechanics, technique, those things can get cleaned up. But you look for the mentality and you look for the athletic skills, kind of that fearless mentality. And Ringo has that. And I think, working with NFL coaches, he's only going to get better. Athletically, he's not going to look at a place, no matter who he's matched up, no matter if it's the most explosive receiver in the league. I think he's going to, stride for stride, he can keep and match up man coverage. So yeah, I would say that's definitely the case.
Yeah, I think we've got our cornerbacks and safeties episodes coming up, our top fives for the secondary. So I think we're going to have some really interesting conversations there on that draft class. It's a good, really good group. Is there anybody else, any other players you think are not being talked about enough, not being talked about highly? Perhaps some guys who you see as, we talk about it on the pod now and again, who's our guy, who's your guy, who you're kind of rooting for, who you think maybe he doesn't go first round, but maybe he's going to go higher than some people think. Who do you really like?
Yeah, when I think about this question, I think a lot of times small school guys that don't necessarily get the recognition. And two guys I thought of right off the bat is a kid by the name of Tucker Kraft, who played for South Dakota State in the FCS level. Really, really good prospect. He chose to stay in school for an extra season. But if he would have came out, if he would have came out last year in the 2022 draft, he likely would have been in the first round discussion. But he struggled with a bunch of injuries this past year, which kind of bumped him down quite a bit. I think he's going to be really exciting, really good receiving prospect. One of those tight ends, like we mentioned earlier, that's going to be in the probably the early day 3 discussion. That could end up being a starter in this league. Another guy I really like is a guy by the name of Aubrey Miller Jr. from Jackson State, also FCS guy, a linebacker, just an absolute tackling machine. The last 2 seasons for Jackson State. Right away, you think about a guy like that's going to play on special teams, have a major role for a team, versatile, can play in multiple different schemes. I really like this kid a lot. I think he's going to be really good. He was a 4-star prospect in high school coming out, so he went to smaller school route, but I think he's going to end up being a really good NFL player.
There we go. There's a couple of names to look out for everyone. So one of the things we asked you to do last time, and we'll get you to do it again, is help our teams out. So who should each of our teams be taking with the first pick that they've got in the draft? So we'll take it in turns. One of them is your Dallas Cowboys, so you've got a vested interest there in that pick. But it's Owine's team up first. So Owine, take us away on this bit.
Yeah, my team's the Falcons, picking in the top 10 again, picking at 8. And I think there's a multiple different directions that they could go here. Interested to see what you think, Daniel. It could be edge, it could be corner, could it be running back?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, I think, drafting that high up, the top pass rushers, as we always know, they go much sooner than other positions, historically speaking. So I think top 10, you almost, you got to grab one of those guys in the Falcons. I think a guy that could be around then is Tyree Wilson, a really, really talented guy that can play on the outside spot, one of those defensive end positions. really has gotten better and better each year. Texas Tech kind of moves all over the line of scrimmage, can drop inside, drop outside, and really, really good player. I think he's gonna go somewhere in that range, I would imagine. I think if the Falcons can get him, I think he'd be a really good pickup for them.
Okay, so that takes us onto my team, so onto the New York Giants, who are picking at 25. A lot of the talk has been around wide receiver. There's a bit of cornerback starting to come in as well. Bit different for us picking later on. That hasn't happened for a while. Who do you think the Giants might pick up with their first rounder?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think the popular pick for them is going to be wide receiver, and who's around that can play a vital role there. The receivers, depending on what you read, depending on what you listen to, I'm not big into reading these mock drafts, but you'll hear different things as far as where these guys are going to go. But a guy I think would be an interesting scheme fit for them would be Jordan Addison from USC. Earlier, prior to the combine, I think we heard his name quite a bit in top 10, top 15 discussion. Didn't have a great combine. Perhaps is going to drop a little bit. But he's just a production machine, both at Pittsburgh when he played there, and then when he transferred over to USC. A really, really good high reception prospect, catches everything, a little lanky, not the greatest size, but for being as small as he is, he does a lot of damage post catch. Really kind of an interesting pick. Will give the Giants a little bit more juice in their offense, kind of building that offense around Daniel Jones and giving him some tools at his disposal. I think Addison will give them perhaps a number one receiver that they're looking for.
Okay. Well, we only go one pick further down, don't we, Brian, for your Cowboys?
Yeah, I'm intrigued to get your thoughts on this, Daniel, where we could go. Obviously, it's tough to predict the further back you go, but yeah, who would you like there?
I think the best pick for the Cowboys, the one that would make the most sense, is retooling that offensive line, continuing to. I love what they did obviously last year, and Tyler Smith ended up being better than I even expected him to be right off the bat. And I think if they add one more piece there, to put at left guard, that could be. So the best available there, I know a guy that they really like is Steve Avila from TCU, who's played a lot of center. He's played some guard. He's even played right tackle in college. I think he's a plug and play guy. You can put at left guard, obviously from that area, playing for TCU. I think he can immediately be a fill-in starter, and I think that would give Dak kind of the offensive line that they need. And then having some depth there. I think then adding the pieces that they added already. I think Avila would give them a really, really solid offensive line once again, and kind of not really give Dak any more excuses if perhaps the offense isn't as good as they could be with the tools they've put in place between Brandon Cooks and adding an extra piece of the offensive line.
We can't forget Stu. Can't forget Stu and his Miami Dolphins. Obviously, they forfeited their first rounder, so they don't pick until number 51 in the second round. Now, obviously, Stu's not here, so if you want to say kicker, that's fine because he won't be able to argue. But who's a good second rounder for the Dolphins to pick up?
I think that the Dolphins would be really good taking a tight end at the spot 51. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for where these top tight ends are going to go. A guy I really like, Dalton Kincaid from Utah, played 5 years in college, played for both San Diego and also Utah. Really good receiving tight end immediately. Kind of has a wide receiver frame, reception machine, catches everything. He'll add some extra juice to their offense. I think he's a really exciting prospect that can be a day one starter. So I like Dalton Kincaid for the Dolphins.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've got to ask you, because there's a lot of talk about it. Who's going one? Who's going first pick? Which of those quarterbacks is going off?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, you kind of know how I feel, but I think it sounds like more and more what's gonna end up happening is CJ Stroud is gonna go. I don't know if that's the smart pick. I personally prefer Bryce Young, but I think CJ Stroud, the way he played down the stretch for the Buckeyes was really impressive. Doesn't have hasn't been as consistent perhaps, and maybe doesn't have the upside that Bryce Young has. But I think, when you look at that NFL frame, what he did in the clutch games for the Buckeyes, it's hard not to get excited about CJ Stroud. And I think it seems like from what you read, typically speaking, when you have the first pick, there's not really any negative to things leaking. when it comes to, because it's not like somebody's going to take your guy at that pick. So, a lot of times when this, where there's smoke, where there's smoke, there's fire. So I think it seems like CJ Stroud's going to be the pick.
Yeah, it feels like we've got 3 weeks to go. There's probably going to be about 3 weeks worth of smoke still to come, isn't there? And it wouldn't surprise me if that keeps going around and we keep hearing different names. That's been great, Daniel. Great to hear your views on this year's draft, and great to hear some names of some players, especially some that we perhaps haven't already covered. Daniel's DTP Draft Guide is available on Amazon, and we'll put a link to his guide in the comments on the YouTube for this episode. Where else can Daniel? Where else can people catch up with your work? Have you already got an eye on next year?
Yeah, always. I would say the best place is to catch me on Twitter. I don't post as much as I used to, perhaps, on Twitter. I get tired of social media sometimes, but I always post my guide each year there. And if you have any questions, I always respond back. I have my website too, DTP Draft Scout. And if you go on there, you can sign up for my newsletter. So that will alert you, in regards to when my draft guide's coming out, any connections I have as far as anything I want you to read, any content I'm putting out. If you go on there and sign up for the newsletter, that would be probably the best place to catch up to me right now, because I don't know, future years, perhaps maybe I'll do my guide not on Amazon, maybe I'll post on a different site perhaps. So it's always possible. So if that's the case, it's always better to connect with me on social media on a personal level rather than relying on finding my guide on Amazon each year. So DTP Draft Scout on Twitter, or go to my website, dtpdraftscout.com.
That's great. Thanks, Daniel. And we're really appreciative for you giving up your time to come and talk to us. And I'm sure that's going to be a great episode for people to listen back to. We'll be with you again soon on Draft Talk Podcast from at 99 Yards. We'll have more top fives. We'll have more draft news. We'll have at least one more live mock draft before we reach draft day. Check out the content, as always, on 99yards.com. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.